Well, statue toppling, deplatforming, historical revisionism. It's all part of this pernicious new cancel culture that's tearing through institutions across the West. But where did the madness start and how can you fight back? A new anthology with contributions from Tony Abbott, Anthony Dillon and Ian Plimer goes a long way to answering these questions and providing a roadmap out of the woke. The book's called Cancel Culture and the Left's Long March. It's out on April 13 and it's edited by a fearless academic well known to you all, Dr. Kevin Donnelly. He joins me now from the capital of woke here in Australia, wonderful old Melbourne. Now, help me out here. We've talked about woke. It seems to have come from nowhere, but it absolutely dominates the conversation now. Where does Australia sit in relation to the woke movement around the world? Are we as bad as other jurisdictions or are we an epicentre here in Victoria?
Well, unfortunately, we are as bad as everywhere else. I mean, it's a contagion. I wrote an article last year comparing wokeness or political correctness to COVID, or as I call it, the Wu flu. It's just as bad. It's an infection which is taking over mainly Western nations, England, America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, what we used to call the Anglosphere before it became politically incorrect. But Melbourne in particular, if you look at Australia, Melbourne is the epicentre. So it's been there since Joan Kirner was Premier and Education Minister. And in fact, she wrote an article when she was Education Minister about using education to overthrow capitalism, to overthrow the status quo. It's this cultural left, neo-Marxist long march. So it's been there for some years and it's very destructive.
Yeah, I remember when I was at university in early working life, coming out of the Keating years, it seemed to be put to bed by John Howard and a real push from Conservatives. And even though the Liberal Party's in power, it has been for 8 years, it doesn't seem to have made much of a dent in pushing this woke culture, back in any way. And it runs counter in Australia. I don't know about Britain, they've got class structures still there and a whole range of divisions in society, but we've always been really egalitarian. So why has it got such a foothold in Australia?
There are many reasons why it's so pervasive. I mean, it goes back to education in particular. During the 1920s, just very quickly, the history of this, there was a Frankfurt School in Germany where a number of academics realised that in the West, the workers would never storm the barricades. If you want a revolution, it has to be through the institutions. So as Michael Gove, the English politician, said, the campaign switched from economics to the culture wars. And in Australia, that has been evident ever since I started teaching. That was over 40 years ago. It's really a long march through education, schools, universities, the media. You only have to look at things like the ABC, the old Fairfax Press. It's very pronounced. And when I reviewed the national curriculum during the Abbott years, it was obvious to me as one of the people looking at that there was an issue there as well.
Well, we saw the circumstance just recently in Britain. Piers Morgan was forced off air. They've had a huge drop in audience share since he has left the morning program. We've had other examples where people have stood up against the left and actually got a lot of support for it. So, the recent case actually was 6 books or so, I think it was, Dr. Seuss books were cancelled in the United States, but they quickly rocketed up and they were the #1 books. I think it was 9 out of the 10 books sold in big numbers that week were all Dr. Seuss books. So do you think the community is starting to fight back?
It is, and it was quite interesting. Last year, the ABC did a survey, Australia Talks, and that was ABC listeners and viewers. And it quite amazed me when I saw the results that up to 68% of those surveyed said they'd had enough of political correctness. And these are ALP even ALP supporters, 52%. There's a reaction against it. And I'd suggest at the last federal election, one reason Scott Morrison did so well north of Brisbane, in Western Sydney, but also parts of Melbourne, is because Australians are generally down to earth. No, I won't use the expression.
No BS.
No BS. And they like to take the pee from one another. Yep. I mean, we get on with life. We don't worry about whether coon cheese is coon cheese or gay time is gay time. they're issues that the cultural left, reflect upon for so long, but there are more important issues. And hopefully, if you look at the book, we go through a number of those, whether it's climate change. Anthony Dillon has written an excellent one on Indigenous disadvantage. Jennifer Oriel about universities, the Long March, how it's impacting on academic freedom. Another chapter about religion, freedom of religion. You only need to look at what happened to Margaret Court, Israel Folau, to know that Christianity is being banished from the public square, and that's a great threat to Australia because it underpins so much of our political and our legal systems. So there are sort of silly examples like coon cheese, but the issue is far more important.
I guess the challenge is for people to feel brave enough to speak out, for people in their workplace to speak out without fear of losing their job or perhaps being put into sort of the stream that's, not for promotion. What can you say to people at home? How do they take up the fight? Because, it's one thing for the government. I wish they'd get in the ring a little bit more, but in the end, the standard we accept becomes our culture. So how do we arm ourselves up?
I mean, that's an excellent question and one that the book does address at the final chapter. But I remember John Howard as PM said it was all about the battle of ideas. And if I go back further to President Abraham Lincoln, he argued what happens in the classroom will decide the future of the country. I mean, it was amazing even last week rather, in Melbourne, all the boys at a school were made to stand up and apologise to the girls for being, misogynist, sexist? No, for being male. And her mother, God bless her, went public about that. Her 12-year-old son came home and complained about it, was concerned and anxious. Parents need to stand up, especially what's happening at school. University students need to be stronger. We need to call it out. We need to rely on rationality and reason and get the debate going, rather than being overly concerned about being politically incorrect. And that's why, I started talking about this in the mid-90s. It's a long battle, but we need to take that strategy as the left does.
We need to take it as seriously as the left do. You're absolutely right. 13th of April, the book's out. I've got my copy. I'll make sure everyone gets there. It's Kevin Donnelly, as always. Well done on this. Well done on the fight, and thank you for your time.
My pleasure, Peter.